All right, well, we're going to stick with our fix-it theme from Friday, right? Instead of moaning and groaning about all the economic problems we've got, we're going to speak with smart people who actually solved complex problems to try to get their take on what it will take to reignite our economy. Peter Kaufman is the president and head of the Restructuring and Distressed M&A practice at the Gordian Group and joins us now. Peter, your firm is named after, you know, this old dude who did this knot, which nobody could figure out, and then Alexander the Great just kind of cut through it, and everybody was happy. We have an economic knot. We have a serious problem in this country, and with all due respect to the president, you know, speeches maybe not the answer right now. We need action. Well, based on your experience, how do we untangle this economic knot of a problem?
Well, restructuring experts look at this situation and say there's some core principles that we like to use. Number one, you need leadership and vision. You need to lay out to everybody, here are the problems, here's how we got here, here's what we think are the solutions, here are the sacrifices everybody has to make in a common cause, and here's what it looks like after the fact. We look for comprehensive fixes, not Band-Aids, and we look for an equitable sharing of the pain as opposed to, say, class warfare.
Have we had the first one? Have we had the leadership and vision?
Well, not in my view. There seems to be an attitude of let's just add government money and stir and everything will be okay. Lewis Carroll wrote in Through the Looking Glass, if you don't know where you're going, pretty much any path will take you there, and I think that's where we are. And I think we need to embrace the private sector. They're the ones who really create long-term, meaningful jobs.
What would be the best way to do that, do you think?
Well, from a restructuring perspective, you've got to fix the balance sheet, and I think that's the United States government's balance sheet, and you've got to fix the operations, and that's the economy. So I think from a restructuring perspective, if you're going to have a comprehensive long-term fix, there are a few things you want to think about. And it's got to be all of them. It can't be piecemeal. Regulation. You need either less of it and or certainty in regulation. Interest rates, I think you need to stop artificially keeping interest rates low. The banks. We've poured trillions into the banks, and yet they don't lend. You've got to get banks to lend, and you've got to get them to still mark to market their troubled loans.
Peter, when you do a restructuring, you can basically decide how you're going to do it. In this case, though, when you get a situation, and maybe there are some in restructurings where you got two sides, you got two different parties, they all want to get to the same place. But how do you do this when you got two different sides? How do you get to that solution?
Well, you're talking about politics, and I'm talking about how do you fix. You need to go to everybody and say, here's the common problem, here are the solutions. Ethanol's a bad idea, but providing alternatives to oil is a great idea to get to better energy sources. And meanwhile, you ought to be drilling. Taxes, you ought to be lowering the corporate tax rate, and I think you should be raising taxes on everybody.
I think it's. Oh, go ahead, Mandy. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I mean, all the prescriptions sound fantastic, but I'm just wondering what time frame would you give the ROI for that? Because these are things that are going to take a really long time.
Well, they're not going to be tomorrow or next month, but they're not going to be forever either. And that's part of being realistic with the American people, with your constituents. You've got to lay out, here's the ditch we're in. We're not going to have a quick fix to this if we're going to have a meaningful long-term fix. I would be very supportive of small business. I would reduce government spending, but I would spend government money smartly on green, renewable research and development and energy, broadband, and the internet.
And to follow up on Mandy's point,
and high-speed rail.
You know, restructuring can be painful before it gets better, right? I mean,
absolutely.
It's hard. Do you think that just because the way the election cycle works, without getting too political, that we have not, I mean, if you ask most Americans, they'll agree it's got to get worse or a little more painful before it gets better, but no politician will get elected if he or she says that. Is the miscommunication of the reality of what might hurt.
Yeah, I don't think there's. I don't believe there's been an adequate disclosure to the American people about what the real problem is, which is these good jobs have gone, and those good jobs aren't coming back. But there are ways to get this economy moving again.
It's structural unemployment. It's long-term unemployment.
That's exactly right. But there are steps that can be taken. But it starts with leadership, vision, communication, and then meld everything together.
The minute you say raise taxes, you know right then and there you can't. That solution can't occur.
Well, respectfully, if you're saying we got to raise taxes and it's part of a class warfare theme, you're right. But if it's part of here's the overall problem, here are the solutions, here's what we look like on the other side, everybody's got to share the sacrifice, I think it's a very different issue.
Sacrifice is a tough one. Look what's happening in Europe. Austerity, anarchy, very closely linked, but it's been great to talk to you. Thank you very much, Peter.
All right, just head on street signs.